Well, it's been quite an interesting, I dare say, successful conference around the issue of expropriation of land without compensation. It's gone beyond our expectations, and also I must add that it had been presentations by the various people from all the various countries were all presented on a non-ideological, non-political scoring basis. And the presentations were focused around the issue, as I have said, of EWC. And something also that is interesting is that, of course, we had asked the presenters to just focus on the experiences of other countries where they have implemented policies that undermine private property rights especially, and where there have not been any property rights, and where properties have been confiscated by government, and this we had emphasized had to be done on a non-political, non-ideological scoring basis. And it turns out that's exactly that was the nature of the presentation by the various people from the various countries. We had occasion to watch the video by the Venezuelans, which was very, very powerful. Again, that was done on a non-ideological, non-political scoring basis, based on what is unfolding right now in terms of the policies that have been implemented. The chickens have come home to roost. So many people have been leaving the country, and like with Zimbabwe as well, as a result of such policies that resulted in the expropriation of properties of other people. But the Venezuelan example is very, very, very dramatic. We see it on television. We see how many people have been leaving that country. And it's been recorded by one of the presenters, for example, that something like 20,000 people daily leave for a country like Peru. And that's very interesting. Now, focusing on the input by Rejoice Ngwenya from the Comaliso think tank. Comaliso stands for the Coalition for Market and Liberal Solutions. This was very, very interesting because we have in this country more than 3 million Zimbabweans who fled from that country, having fled from starvation, from hunger, from famine, and they are here as a result of exactly the kinds of policies that we are contemplating in this country in the form of the EWC, which is expropriation of land without compensation. So overall, one leaves with the impression, and this is the feedback that we've been getting, that this is not the route to go in this country. However, in my presentation, what I pointed out, and which I keep emphasizing over and over again, is that at the end of the day, the policymakers, the politicians, the members of parliament can get away with the most damaging policies that one could imagine, knowing full well that they are not going to be directly affected at all, because they will be guaranteed their incomes, they'll be guaranteed their fringe benefits. And so who always suffers with policies like this being implemented? It is always the ordinary people. Call them ordinary, but it is always the poorest people. You can see who the people have been that have come from Zimbabwe to settle in South Africa, to make a living, to eke out a living in South Africa. It is always the poor people. It is the poorest especially who suffer the direct consequences of such policies such as we are contemplating. But the point is also that one should consider is that, first of all, knowing that no economy, no country can operate or exist in isolation from the rest of the world, it is of paramount importance that the policies that are enacted do not deter investment, foreign direct investment especially, and do not result or precipitate a flight of capital within the country and going to other countries, because this is something that politicians, policymakers must understand. This is the reality. It's got nothing to do with any ideological agenda, and that is investors look at markets where they can realize the best returns on their investment. That's the bottom line. There is no altruistic consideration in this at all. And so we have policies here. If we are bent on enacting policies such as the EWC that are surely going to deter investment, we will suffer the consequences. It will not be the members of parliament. And so we are actually seeing right now a flight of capital in this country as a result of the discussion, even just the discussion around EWC. And once that's enacted, we are going to see a situation where the economy that has been contracting will contract further. It will shrink, and that will mean that there will be even more people being unemployed. Right now, our unemployment levels are catastrophic. Something above 30% of able-bodied people are unemployed. They are unemployed. Now, if we have a situation where the economy keeps contracting, we are going to find that even more people are going to be unemployed. By the way, many economists have argued very plausibly that the unemployment rate in this country is far higher than the 27% that's been officially acknowledged in this country. So we should not contemplate, having the EWC being enacted, being implemented, so being given effect in terms of an amendment to the constitution of this country. We will regret one of these days if it is implemented, to see when the chickens come home to roost that we have been our own worst enemies. No, let me not say that, because the buck would stop with those who would be part of the process of enacting the EWC. That's it. Now, the thing is, this is something that's very, very important. There are credible, feasible, economically viable alternatives to the EWC. There are. Without it being necessary to change the Constitution or any aspect of the Constitution. And one of these measures is, there are two measures that I'm going to dwell upon very briefly. One measure is that the state should relinquish parcels of land that it owns and has acknowledged as superfluous land, and parcel that out to poor families, indigent families, on a one plot, one family basis. Now, with this proposal in mind, there should be a rigorous means-tested basis in terms of identifying indigent families. So once that is parceled, the land is parceled out, then the responsibility of the state will be just simply to lay out the basic infrastructure like the streets, like street lighting, and also making accessible water. And then it just gets out of the picture. And then once those parcels of land will have been given out to people, you will see something miraculous happening, with people really taking off. And once those pieces of land have been parceled out, they should be identified and registered and recorded as in the form of a title deed. So it should be a freehold, unencumbered title deed that at the end of the day, those people who own those plots would feel that they have this. That would give them a degree of certainty that nothing could ever happen to their ownership of those properties. And we know once that security is there in terms of ownership of the title deed, they will take off, because ownership of property has this logic that you want to see the value of that property being enhanced. You want to see it appreciating, and so you work harder. That makes you productive. And so in cases where, for example, we've been able to get people to get title deeds, we've seen what has unfolded. And that is just ordinary people achieving extraordinary things. And what they would do, for example, is that once they got the title deeds in places where they've been occupying the same homes for generations that have been owned by the government, especially at local government level, and people for generations living, occupying those houses, or as tenants, that once they get the title deed, they get going. They get going. And some of the things that happen are that those same people who are now owners of the legally titled properties, that they start to employ bricklayers, plasterers, carpenters, welders who manufacture gates, burglar bars, and they get also plumbers and all sorts of people. And in the process, those artisans bring a lot of people with them who are unskilled, and in that process what happens is there is a transfer of skills right across. And this is just a simple thing that's catalyzed by just one act, and that is the statutory pen decreeing that this person owns the home that has been occupied for generations within the family. And so coming back to the land that will be parceled out by the government to indigent families, the same thing we would see unfolding, and that is people taking care of their own destinies and people employing other people, employing artisans. And what happens? Where does the money come from? It does not necessarily come from the government. We've seen how people would go out and seek work, finding work, and those who've already been working longer hours, all on the basis of making improvements on the properties that they own. And so once a person has a title deed to the property, to the piece of land, that becomes active. It becomes active in economic significance. Now, Hernando de Soto talks about dead capital in his book, The Mystery of Capital. What he means thereby is that any property that is not legally registered on a freehold titled basis is of no economic significance. But once it is legally titled, at the stroke of a pen, it becomes active capital. It becomes active capital. And that means it becomes part of the economy. And so at the stroke of a pen, you find a situation where the have-nots now become the haves in terms of owning these properties. And so this is a very practical, it's a feasible, economically viable proposal that the government could implement almost overnight. And we have a project that is known as the Kailam Property Titling Project, in terms of which we go out to seek sponsorship from the private sector and individuals in their personal private capacities to sponsor the whole process of conveyancing a property, so that at the end of the day, the property that's been occupied on a tenancy basis becomes titled, and you have the owner of the house now being a legally titled owner. And for the conveyancing fee, we are talking about 2,250 rands per unit. Now we had discussions before implementing the Kailam My Home project, property titling project, and with the conveyancing firms, we asked them, persuaded them to scale down their standard fee. And so the 2,250 rands that they charge for conveyancing properties in the context of the Kailam Property Titling Project is less than a quarter of the standard fee that is charged by conveyancing firms in this country. Now, there's something like 5 million eligible houses. This is our educated guesstimate. Over 5 million eligible properties that are owned by the government, and which means that there are records in terms of who the registered tenants are, and overnight the government could just turn things around and allow those people to become the haves in terms of having title deeds in respect of those properties that many of them have been living in for generations as a result of the apartheid policies, and also long before the advent of apartheid in 1948 as a result of the Native Land Act of 1913. That is the importance of these proposals. They are easy to implement, and the government has the wherewithal in terms of implementing them. But you ask the question as to why is the government not doing that? I don't think the government has its priorities right. I don't think so. I think many in the government are thinking about the elections in 2019, and therefore tend to think of policy proposals that would make the loudest noise in terms of rhetoric, and hoping that that's going to translate into great numbers of people falling behind them and voting for them. There is naivety in terms of that view, because at the end of the day, those very same people, after the elections, they will ask about all these promises that have been made. And so the government right now, though it does not realize it, is shooting itself in the foot in terms of the EWC. We need not go this route in this country. It's going to be destructive in socio-economic terms. The evidence is there. Ask the Zimbabweans themselves, and also they will tell you about the fact that all those politicians that were responsible for indigenization policies and other related policies in Zimbabwe that enabled the government to expropriate properties, especially those that belonged to farmers, they will tell you that those people who were responsible for those policies are safe and sound. There has not been an impact in terms of their own personal incomes and all sorts of fringe benefits. That is what the people tell you. There's another concern of mine that I have, and that is just the discussion and the adoption of the EWC as a resolution to effect the change to the Constitution accordingly. It has started to undermine the racial fabric in this country. The racial fabric. Because the rhetoric is that it is going to be the whites that are being targeted. However, this is a concern of mine. However, there is naivety in operating on the basis that it's going to be only just the white properties or the land that's going to be targeted. Because the thing is, the resolution as it stands, it says expropriation of land without compensation. Now understand this. Land in the broader sense means property. It means property. Now as it stands right now, think about what happens, say a couple of elections down the line, when there will be a totally different government in place than the one that we have. And that government might have nefarious agendas in terms of sorting out, say, some sector of the South African population. It could be, for example, a coalition of the Nguni speaking, of which I'm part, Nguni speaking, and say the African speaking or the English speaking, wanting to sort out maybe the Sotho speaking or the English speaking. And looking at this resolution as it stands, the EWC resolution, as they would be able to sort out whoever they had in mind in terms of their nefarious agenda. So what it means right now in real terms, in legal terms, is that everyone's land, everyone's property is vulnerable. Everyone. And the black property is also vulnerable. So this is the challenge that has to be faced. I'll prevail on everyone on the basis of my input, and which is based on my firm beliefs. We must look not only at the intentions of policy, especially in respect of the EWC. We must focus, I dare say, exclusively on the unintended consequences. We must focus on the probable or inevitable consequences of EWC being implemented. there is a tendency within Parliament and outside of Parliament amongst people to tend to focus more on the intentions of policy, which is very, very wrong. The focus has to be on the consequences of policy, which was the central consideration in terms of the presentations by the various people from the various countries in the context of this EW conference that we've had. And thank you very much. And